Alex Rider, Book 2, Point Blanc. Chapter 9. My name is Grief. Who's Grief? The academy at Point Blanc had been built by a lunatic. For a time it had been used as an asylum. Alex remembered what Alan Blunt had told him as the helicopter began its final descent. The red and white helipad loomed up to receive it. The photograph in the brochure had been artfully taken. Now that he could see the building for himself, he could only describe it as mad. It was a jumble of towers and battlements, green sloping roofs and windows of every single shape and size. Nothing fitted together properly. The overall design should have been simple enough. A circular area with 2 wings, but one wing was longer than the other. The 2 sides didn't match. The academy was 4 floors high, but the windows were spaced in such a way that it was hard to tell where one floor ended and the next began. There was an internal courtyard that wasn't quite square, with a fountain that had frozen solid. Even the helipad jutting out of the roof was ugly and awkward, as if a spaceship had smashed into the brickwork and lodged in place. Miss Stellenbosch flicked off the controls. "I will take you down to meet the director," she shouted over the noise of the blaze. "Your luggage will be brought down later." It was cold on the roof. The snow covering the mountain still hadn't melted, and everything white for as far as the eye could see. The academy was built into the side of a steep slope. A little further down, Alex saw a great iron tongue that started at ground level, but then curved outward as the mountainside dropped away. It was a ski jump, the sort of thing he had seen at the Winter Olympics. The end of the curve was at least 50 meters above the ground, and far below, Alex could make out a flat area shaped like horseshoes where jumpers were meant to land. He was staring at it, imagining what it would be like to propel yourself into space with only 2 skis to break your fall, when the woman grabbed his arm. We don't use it," she said. "It's forbidden. Come now, let's get out of the cold." They went through a door in the side of one of the towers, and down a narrow spiral staircase, each step a different distance apart, that took them all the way to the ground floor. Now they were in a long, narrow corridor with plenty of doors, but no windows. "Classrooms," Miss Stellenbosch explained. "You'll see them later." Alex followed her through the strangely silent building. The central heating had been turned up high inside the academy, and the atmosphere was warm and heavy. They stopped at a pair of modern glass doors which opened into the courtyard that Alex had seen from above. From the heat back into the cold again, Miss Stellenbosch led him through the doors and past the frozen fountain. A movement caught his eye and Alex glanced up. This was something he hadn't noticed earlier. A sentry stood on one of the towers. He had a pair of binoculars round his neck and a submachine gun slung across one arm. Armed guards in school? Alex had only been here a few minutes and already he was unnerved. "Through here." Miss Stellenbosch opened another door for him and he found himself in the main reception hall of the academy. A log fire was burning in a massive fireplace with two stone dragons guarding the flames. A grand staircase led upwards. The hall was lit by chandelier with at least 100 bulbs. The walls were wood panelled, the carpet was thick dark red, and a dozen pairs of eyes persuaded Alex as he followed Miss Stellenbosch towards the next corridor. The hall was decorated beautifully, amazingly, so amazing. The room was so cool. The hall was was also decorated with animal heads, a rhino, an antelope, a water buffalo, and saddest of all, a lion. Alex wondered who had shot them. They came to a single door, which suggested they hadn't come to the end of their journey. So far, Alex hadn't encountered any boys, but along the out of the window, he saw 2 or more guards marching slowly past, both of them cradling machine guns. I've seen gun, but not a machine gun. Or are they both the same? What's outside my house? Is that a plane? Well. He sort of... Miss Stellenbosch knocked on the door. Come in. Come in. Even with just 2 words. Come in. Even with just 2 words. Alex caught the South African accent. The door opened and they went into a huge room that made no sense like the rest of the building. Its shape was irregular. None of the walls running parallel. The ceiling was about 7 meters high. The windows running the whole way, giving an impressive view of the slopes. The room was modelled with soft lighting coming from units concealed in the walls. The furniture was ugly, but not as ugly as the further animal heads on the wall and the zebra skin on the wooden floor. There were three chairs next to a small fireplace. One of them was gold and antique. A man was sitting in it. His head turned as Alex came in. Good afternoon, Alex. He said, please, come and sit down. Alex sauntered into the room and took one of the chairs. Miss Stellenbosch sat in the other. And sit yourself. My name is Grace, the man continued. Dr. Grace. I'm very pleased to meet you and to have you here. Alex stared at the man. I am very pleased to meet you and to have you stay here. Alex stared at the man who was the director of Point Blanc, at the white paper skin and the eyes burning behind the red spectacles. It was like meeting a skeleton, and for a moment he was lost for words. Then he recovered. Nice place, he said. Do you think so? There was no emotion whatsoever in Greek's voice. So far, he had moved only his neck. The building was designed in 1857 by a Frenchman who was certainly the world's worst architect. This was his only commission. When the first owners moved in, they had shot him. When the first owners moved in, they had him shot. There are still quite a few people here with guns. There are still a few people here with guns Alex glanced out of the window as another pair of guards walked past. Point Blanc is unique, Dr. Eve explained. You will soon discover all the boys who have been sent here from families of great wealth and importance. We are the sons of the emperors, the industrialists, boys like yourself. It follows that we could very easily become a target for terrorists. The guards are therefore here for your protection. That's very kind of you. Alex felt like he was being too polite. It was time to show this man what sort of person he was meant to be. But to be honest, I don't really want to be here myself. So if you'll just tell me how I get down into town, maybe I can get the next train home. There is no way down into the town. Dr. Reef lifted a hand to stop Alex interrupting. Alex glinted at the eyes glinting red behind the spectacles. The man moved as if every bone in his body had been broken and then put back together again. He seemed both old and young at the same time, and somehow not completely human. The skiing season is over. It is too dangerous now. There is only the helicopter that will take you and that from here only when I say so. The hand lowered itself again. You are here, Alex, because you have disappointed your parents. You were expelled from the school. You have the difficulties with the bully. That wasn't my bloody fault, I protested. Don't interrupt the doctor, Miss Edinburgh said, Alexander balefully. Your appearance is displeasing, Dr. Grief went on. Your language also. It is our job to turn you into a boy of whom parents can be proud of. I am happy as I am, Alex said. There is no relevance. Dr. Grief felt silent. Alex shivered. There was something about this room so big, so empty, so twisted out of shape. So what are you going to do with me? Alex asked. There will be no lessons to begin with, Miss Stellenbosch said, for the first couple of weeks. We want you to assimilate. What does that mean? To assimilate, to conform, to adapt, to become like. It was as if she were reading out of a dictionary. There are 6 boys at the academy at the moment. You'll meet them and you will spend the time with them. There will be opportunities for sport and for being social. There is a good library here, and you will read soon. You will learn our methods. I want to call my mum and dad, Alex said. The use of telephones is forbidden, Miss Stellenbosch explained. Miss Stellenbosch explained. She tried to smile sympathetically, but with her face, it wasn't quite possible. We find it makes our students homesick, she went on. Of course, you may write letters if you wish. I prefer emails, Alex said. For some reason, personal computers are not permitted. Alex shrugged and swore under his breath. Dr. Grief had seen him. You will be the polite to the assistant director, he snapped. He had raised his voice, but the words came out acid. You should be aware that Alex, Miss Stellenbosch has worked for me for now 26 years, and that when I met her, she has been voted Miss South Africa 5 years in the row. Alex looked at the ape-like face. a beauty contest?" he asked. "The weightlifting championships." Dr. Grief glanced at the fireplace. "Show the humour," he said. Mr. Bush got up and went over to the fireplace. There was a poker lying in the grate. She took it with both hands. For a moment she seemed to concentrate. Alex gasped. The solid metal poker, at least 2 centimeters thick, was slowly bending. Now it was U-shaped. Miss Stellenbosch wasn't even sweating. She brought the 2 ends together and dropped it back into the grate. It clanked against the stone. "We enforce strict discipline here at the academy," Dr. Reeve said. "Bedtime is at the 10 o'clock, not the minute past. We do not tolerate bad language. You have no contact with the outside world without our permission. You will not attempt to leave, and you will do as you are told." Instantly, without hesitating, and finally, he leaned toward Alex. "You are permitted." So he leaned toward Alex. "You are permitted only in certain parts of this building." He gestured with a hand, and for the first time Alex noticed a second door at the far end of the room. "My private headquarters are through there. You will remain on the ground floor and the first floor only. And the first floor only. You can only stay in those rooms. No private headquarters. Okay? That is where the bedrooms and classrooms are located. And second and third floors are out of the bounds. The basement also. This is again for your safety. You're afraid I'll trip on the stairs?" Alex asked. Dr. Grief ignored him. "You may leave," he said. Wait outside the office," Miss Stellenbosch said. Someone will be along to collect you." Alex stood up. We will make you into what your parents want," Dr. Grief said. Maybe they don't want me at all." "We can arrange that too," Alex went. An unpleasant boy. A few days faster than usual. The Gemini project closing down. If the door hadn't been so thick, Alex would have been able to hear more. The moment he left the room, he cupped his ear against the keyhole, hoping to pick up something that might be useful for MA6. Sure enough, Dr. Grief and Miss Stellenbosch were busily talking on the other side, but Alex heard little and understood less. A hand clamped down on his shoulder, and he twisted round annoyed with himself. A so-called spy caught listening at the keyhole. But it wasn't one of the guards. Alex found himself looking up at a round-faced boy with long dark hair. Dark-eyed and pale skin, he was wearing a very old Star Wars t-shirt, torn jeans, and a baseball cap. Recently he had been in a fight, and it looked like he'd got the worst of it. There was a bruise around one of his eyes and a gash on his lip. "They'll shoot you if they catch you listening at the doors," the boy said. He looked at Alex with hostile eyes. Alex guessed he was the sort of boy who wouldn't trust anyone easily. "I'm James Prince," he said. "They told me to show you around, Alex friend." "So what did you do to get sent to this dump?" James asked as they walked back down the corridor. "Got expelled from Eton. Got thrown out of school in Dusseldorf." James sighed. "I thought it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Wonder my dad sent me here." "What does your dad do?" "He's a banker. He plays the money market. He loves money and has lots of it." James's voice was flat, unemotional. Dieter Sprins. Alex remembered the name. He made the front page of every newspaper in England a few years ago. The $100 million man. That was how much he had made in 24 hours. In just 24 hours. It's a lot, and it took a long time too. And that was very time. Oh, wow. that was how much. At the same time, the pound had crashed and the British government had almost collapsed. Yeah, no one asked me to show you a photograph because I don't have one. This way. They had reached the main hall with this dragonfly place. From here, James showed him to the dining room. A lot of very, very long, high-ceilinged room with 6 tables and a hatch leading into the kitchen. After that, they visited 2 rooms, a games room and a library. The academy reminded Alex of an expensive hotel in a ski resort, and not just because of its setting. There was a sort of heaviness about this place. Really heaviness about this place. A sense of being cut off from the real world. The air was warm and silent, and despite the size of the room, Alex couldn't help feeling claustrophobic. If the place had been a hotel, it would have been a non-popular one. Griffith said there were only 6 boys living there. The building could have housed 60. Empty space was everywhere. There was nobody in either of the living rooms, just a collection of armchairs, desks, and tables, but they found a couple of boys in the library. This was a long, narrow room with an old-fashioned oak shelves lined with books in a variety of languages. A suit of medieval Swiss armour stood in an alcove at the far end. "This is Tom and Hugo," James said. "They're probably doing extra maths or something, so we'd better not disturb them." The 2 boys looked up and nodded briefly. One of them was reading a textbook, the other was writing. They were both much more smartly dressed than James and didn't look very friendly. "Creeps," James said as soon as they had left the room. In what way?" "When I told you about this place, they said that all the kids had problems. I thought it was going to be wild. Do you have a cigarette?" "I don't smoke." "Great. I get here and it's like a museum or a monastery or I don't know what. It looks like Mr. Grief's been busy. Everyone's quiet, hard-working, boring. God knows how he did. Sucked their brains out with a straw or something. A couple of days ago I got in a fight with a couple of them just for the hell of it." He pointed to his face. "They beat the crap out of me and they went back to their studies." Really creepy. They went into the games room, which contained table tennis, my favourite tennis. Table tennis, darts, shooting, a widescreen TV, and a snooker table. "Don't try to play snooker," James said. "The room's on a slant and all the balls roll to the side." Then they went upstairs. This was where the boys had their study bedrooms. Each one contained a bed and an armchair, a television. "It only shows the programs Dr. Reeve wants you to see," James said. "A wardrobe and a desk with a second door leading into a small bathroom with a toilet and a shower." "None of the rooms were locked. We're not allowed to lock them, James explained. "We're all stuck here with nowhere to go, so nobody bothers to steal anything. Hugo Vries, the boy in the library, used to nick anything he could get his hands on. He was arrested for shoplifting in Amsterdam, but not anymore. But he's another success story. He's flying home next week. His father owns diamond mines. He bothers shoplifting when you could afford to buy the whole shop." Alex's study was at the end of the corridor, with views over the ski jump. His suitcase had already been carried up and were waiting for him on the bed. Everything felt rare, but according to James, the study bedrooms were the only part of the school which the boys were allowed to decorate themselves. They could choose their own duvets and cover the walls with their own posters. "They say it's important that you express yourself," James said. "If you haven't brought anything with you, Miss Stomach Bag will take you into Grenoble. Miss Stomach Bag. Miss Zenbosch. That's my name for her. What do the other boys call her? They call her Miss Zenbosch. James paused by the door. This is a deeply weird place, Alex. I've been to a lot of schools because I've been thrown out of a lot of schools. But this one is the pits. I've been here for 6 weeks now and I've hardly had any lessons. They have music evenings and discussion evenings. They're trying to get me to read, but otherwise I've been left on my own. They want you to assimilate, Alex said, remembering what Dr. Grief had said. That's their word for it. But this place, they may call it a school, but it's more like being in prison. You've seen the guards. I thought they were here to protect us. If you think that, you're a bigger idiot than I thought. Think about it. There are 30 of them. 30 armed guards for 7 kids. That's no protection. That's intimidation. James explains. Alex examined Alex for a second time. It would be nice to think someone finally had arrived. Who I can relate to, he said. Maybe you can, Alex said. Yeah, but for how long? James left, closing the door. Alex began to unpack. Alex began to unpack all his things. The bulletproof ski suit and infrared goggles were at the top of the first case. It didn't look as if he would be needing them. It wasn't as if he even had any skis. He found the hand warmers in their brightly coloured packets and laid them aside. Then came the GPS receiver with the panic button built into the side. He remembered the instructions Smith had given him. If the balloon goes up, just press the button 3 times. He was almost tempted to do it now. There was something unsettling about this academy. He could feel it even now. In his room, he was like a goldfish in a bowl looking up. He almost expected to see a pair of huge eyes looming over him, and he knew that they would be wearing red-tinted glasses. He weighed a little device in his hand. He couldn't hit the panic button. Not yet. He had nothing to report back to MI6. There were nothing to connect the school with the deaths of the 2 men in New York and the Black Sea. But if there was anything he knew where he would find it, why were the 2 whole floors of the building out of bounds? Presumably the guards slept up there, but even though Dr. Grief seemed to employ a small army, that would still leave a lot of empty rooms. The 2nd and 3rd floors, if something was going on at the academy, it had to be going on down there. The bell sounded. Alex swung his case shut, left his room and walked down the corridor. He saw another couple of boys walking ahead of him, talking quietly together like the boys he had seen in the library. They were both clean and well-dressed, with hair cut short and smartly groomed. Majorly creepy, James had said. Even on first sight, Alex had to agree. He reached the main staircase. The 2 boys had gone down. Alex glanced in their direction, then went up. The staircase turned a corner and stopped. Ahead of him was a sheet of metal that rose up from the floor to the ceiling and all the way across, blocking off the view. The wall had been added recently, like the helipad. Someone had carefully and deliberately cut the building in 2. There was a door set in the metal wall, and beside it, a keypad with 9 buttons, demanding a code. Alex reached for the door handle, hearing closing around it. He didn't expect the door to open, but nor did he expect what happened next. The moment his fingers came into contact with the handle, An alarm went off, a shrieking siren that echoed throughout the building. A few seconds later, he became aware of footsteps on the stairs and turned to find two guards facing him, their guns raised. Neither of them spoke to him. One of them pushed past him and punched a code into the keypad, and the alarm stopped, and then Miss Stellenbosch was there, hurrying forward on her short, stubby legs. "Alex!" she exclaimed, her eyes filled with suspicion. "What are you doing here? The director told you that the upper floors are forbidden." "Yeah, well, I'd forgotten." Alex looked straight at her. "I heard the bell go, and I was on my way to the dining room." "The dining room is downstairs." "Right." Alex walked past the two guards, who stepped aside to let him pass. He felt Miss Stellenbosch watching him as he went. Metal doors, alarms, and guards with machine guns. What were they hiding? Then he remembered something else. The Gemini project. Those were the words he had heard when he was listening at Dr. Brief's door. Gemini, the twins. One of the 12 stars. One of the 12 star signs. What did it mean? What did it mean? Turning question over in his mind, Alex went down to meet the rest of the school. Chapter 10. Things that go click in the night. At the end of his first week at Point Blanc, Alex drew up a list of the 6 boys drew a list of the 6. He drew a list so he could remember them, I guess. Yeah. So he drew a list. He shared the school. It was mid-afternoon and he was alone in his room. There was a notepad open in front of him. It had taken him about half an hour to put together the names and the few details that he had. He only wished he had more. Hugo Vries, 14, Dutch, lives in Amsterdam. Brown hair, green eyes, father's name, Rudy, owns diamond mines, speaks little English, reads and plays guitar, very solitary, sent to P13 for shoplifting, and Toy McMorrin, 14, Canadian, from Vancouver, parents are divorced, mother run media empire, newspaper, reddish hair, blue eyes, well built, chess player, car thefts and drunken driving. Nicholas Mark, 14 years old, French from Bordeaux, expelled from private school in Paris, cause unknown, drinking, brown hair, brown eyes, very fit all-rounder, good at sports, but hates losing, tattoo of devil on left shoulder. Father, Anthony Mark. It's like Anthony Horowitz, the author of the book. Anthony Mark, airlines, pop music, hotels, never mentions his mother. Cassian James, 14 years old, American, fair hair, with brown eyes, mother, Jill, studio chief in Hollywood, parents divorced, loud voice, swears a lot, plays jazz piano, expelled from 3 schools, various drug offences, sent to P13 after smuggling. Arrest, but won't talk about it now. One of the kids who beat up James, stranger than he looks. Joe, Canterbury, 14 years old, American, spends a lot of time with Cassian, helped him with James, brown hair, blue eyes, mother, name unknown, New York Senator, father, something big at the Pentagon, vandalism, truancy, shoplifting, sent to P13 after stealing and smashing up car, vegetarian, permanently chewing gum? Has he given up smoking? James Prince, 14 years old, German, lives in Dusseldorf. Brown hair, brown eyes, pale father, Dieter Prince, banker, well-known financier, the $100 million man, mother living in England, expelled for wounding a teacher with an air pistol. My only friend at P3, and the only one who really hates it here. Lying on his lying on his bed, Alex studied the list. What did it tell him? Not a great deal. First, all the boys were the same age, 14, the same as him. At least 3 of them, and possibly 4. 4 had parents who were either divorced or separated. They all came from huge, wealthy backgrounds. Blanc had already told him that was the case, but Alex was surprised by just how diverse the parents were. Airlines, diamonds, politics and movies, France, German, Holland, Canada and America. All of the parents were at the top of his and her field, and those fields covered just about every human activity. He himself was supposed to be the son of a supermarket king. Food. That was another word. Industry. He could tick off. At least 2 of the boys had been arrested for shoplifting. 2 of them had been involved with drugs, but Alex knew that the list somehow hid more than it revealed. The exception of James. It was hard to pin down what made the boys at Point Blanc different in the same strange way. They all looked the same. Their eyes and hair were different colours. They wore different clothes. All the faces were different. Tom handsome and confident. Joe quiet and watchful. And of course, they spoke not only with different voices but in several languages. Jason had talked about brains being sucked out with straws, and he had a point. It was as if the consciousness somehow invaded them all. They had become puppets dancing on the same string. The bell rang downstairs. Alec looked at his watch. It was exactly 1 o'clock. Lunchtime. There was another thing about school. Everything was to be done to the exact minute. Lessons from 9 until 12. Lunch from 1 to 2. And so on. James made a point of being late for everything, and Alex had taken to joining him. It was a tiny rebellion, but a satisfying one. It shows they still had little control over their lives. The other boys, of course, turned up like clockwork. They would be in the dining room now, waiting quietly for the food to be served. Alex rolled over on the bed and reached for a pen. He wrote a single word on the pad underneath the names. Brainwashing. What? Maybe that was the answer. According to James, the other boys had arrived at the academy 2 months before him. He had been there for 6 weeks. That added up to just 14 weeks in total, and Alex knew that. You didn't take a bunch of delinquents and turn them into perfect students just by giving them good books. Dr. Reed had to be doing something else. Drugs, hypnosis, something. He waited for 5 more minutes, then hid the notepad under his mattress and left the room. He wished he could lock the door, but there was no privacy on Point Blanc. Even bathrooms had no locks, and Alex still couldn't shake off the feeling that everything he did, even everything he thought was somehow being monitored, noted down, evidence to be used against him. It was 1:10 when he reached the dining room, and sure enough, the other boys were already there, eating their lunch and talking quietly amongst themselves. Nicholas and Cassian were at the one table. Hugo, Tom and Joe were at another. Nobody was flicking peas. Nobody even had their elbows on the table. Tom was talking about a visit he had made to some museum in Grenoble. Alex had only been in the museum in Grenoble. Alex had only been in the room for a few seconds, but already his appetite had gone. James had arrived just ahead of him and was standing at the hatch helping himself to food. Most of the food arrived pre-cooked, and one of the guards heated it up. Today it was stew. Alex got his lunch and sat next to James. The two of them had their own table. They'd become friends quite effortlessly. Everyone else ignored them. You want to go out after lunch? James asked. Sure, why not? There's something I wanted to talk to you about. Alex looked past James and the other boys. There was Tom at the head of the table, reaching out for a jug of water. He was dressed in a polo jersey and jeans. Next to him was Joe Santabury, the American. He was talking to the Hugo now, waving a finger to emphasize a pointer. Where had Alex seen the movement before? Cassian was right behind them, round-faced with fine light brown hair, laughing at a joke, different but the same, watching them closely. Alex tried to work out what that meant. It was all in the details, the things you wouldn't notice unless you saw them all together, like they were now. The way they were all sitting with their backs straight and their elbows close to their sides. The way they held their knives and forks. Hugo laughed, and Alex realized for a moment that he had become a mirror image of Cassian. It was the same laugh. He watched Joe eat a mouthful of food. Then he watched Nicholas. They were two different boys. There was no doubting that, but they ate in the same way, as if they were mimicking each other. There was movement at the door, and suddenly Miss Stellenbosch appeared. Good afternoon, boys, she said. Good afternoon, Miss Stellenbosch. 5 people answered, but Alex heard only one voice. He and James remained silent. Lessons this afternoon will begin at 1 o'clock. At 3 o'clock. The subjects will be Latin and French. The lessons will be taught by Dr. Grief and Miss Stellenbosch. There are no other teachers at the school. Alex hadn't yet been taught anything. James dipped in and out of class, depending on his mood. There will be a discussion this evening in the library, Miss Stellenbosch went on. The subject is violence in television and film. Mr. McMorrin will be opening the debate. Afterwards, there will be hot chocolate, and Dr. Grief will be giving a lecture on the works of Mozart. Everyone is welcome to attend. James jabbed a finger into his open mouth and stuck out his tongue. Alex smiled. The other boys were listening quietly. Dr. Grief would also like to congratulate Cassian James on winning the poetry competition. His poem is pinned to a notice board in the main hall. That is all. She turned and left the room. She turned and left the room. James rolled his eyes. Let's go and get some fresh air, he said. I'm feeling sick. The two of them went upstairs and put on their coats. James had the room next door to Alex and had done his best to make it more homely. There were posters of Batman movies on the walls and a mobile of the solar system dangling above the bed. A red and white Tintin space rocket stood on the beside table next to a photograph of 2 people, presumably his parents. There were clothes of everywhere. James obviously didn't believe in hanging them up there. then hanging them up. Somehow he managed to find a scarf and a single glove. He shoved one hand into a pocket. "Let's go," he said. They went back down and along the corridor. Passing the games room, Nicholas and Cassian were playing table tennis, and Alex stopped at the door to watch them. The ball was bouncing back and forth, and Alex found himself mesmerized. He stood there for about 60 seconds watching kerplink, kerplunk, kerplink, kerplunk, kerplink, kerplunk, kerplink, kerplunk. Neither of the boys were scoring. There it was again, different but the same. Obviously, there were two boys there, but same. But the way they played, the style of their game was identical. If it had been one boy knocking the ball up against the mirror, the result would have looked much the same. Alex shivered. James was standing at his shoulder. The two of them moved away. Hugo was sitting in the library. The boy who had been sent to Point Blanc was for shoplifting, was reading a Dutch edition of National Geography magazine. They reached the hall, and there was Cassian's poem prominently pinned to the notice board. He had been sent to Point Blanc for smuggling drugs. Now he was writing about daffodils. Alex pushed open the main door and felt the cold wind hit his face. He was grateful for it. He needed to be reminded that there was a real world outside. It had begun to snow again. The two boys walked slowly around the building. A couple of guards walked towards them, speaking softly in German. Alex had counted 30 guards at Point Blanc, all of them young German men, dressed in uniform black wool, neck sweaters and black padded waistcoats. The guards never spoke to the boys. They had pale, unhealthy faces and close cropped hair. Dr. Reef had said they were for his attention. But Alex still wondered, were they to keep the intruders out or the boys in? "This way," James said. James walked ahead, his feet sinking into the thick snow. Alex followed, looking back at the windows on the second and third floors. It was muddy, half the castle. Perhaps more was closed off to him, and he still couldn't think of a way getting up there. He couldn't climb. The brick was too smooth, and there was no convenient ivy to provide handholds. The drain pipes looked too fragile to take his weight. Something moved. Alex stopped in his tracks. "What is it?" James asked. "There," Alex pointed at the third floor. He thought he'd seen a figure watching them from a window 2 floors above his room. It was only there for a moment. The face seemed to be covered, a white mask with narrow slits for the eyes, but even as he pointed, the figure stepped back out of sight. "I don't see anything," James said. It's gone." They walked on, heading for the abandoned ski jump. According to James, the jump had been built just before Grief had bought the academy. There had been plans to turn the building into a winter sports training centre. The jump had now been used. They reached the wooden barriers that lay across the entrance and stopped. "Let me ask you something," James said. His breath was misting in the cold air. "What do you think of this place?" "Why do you have to talk out here?" Alex asked. Despite his coat, he was beginning to shiver. "Because when I'm inside the building, I get the feeling that someone is listening to every word I say." Alex nodded. "I know what you mean." He considered the question James had put to him. "I think you were right. The first day we met," he said. "This place is creepy. So how do you feel about getting out of here? You know how to fly a helicopter?" No, but I'm going." James paused and looked around. The 2 guards had gone into his school. There was nobody else in sight. "I can trust you, Alex. because you've only just got here. He hasn't got to you yet. He was Dr. Grief. James didn't need to say the name, but believe me, he went on. It won't be long. If you stay here, you're going to end up like the others, model students. That's exactly the term for them. It's like they're all made out of plasticine. Well, I've had enough. I'm not going to let him do that to me. Are you going to run away? Alex asked. Who needs to run? James looked down at the slope. Looked down the slope. I'm going to ski. Alex looked at the slope. It plunged deeply down, stretching on forever. Is that possible? He asked. I know Grief says it's too dangerous, but he would, wouldn't he? It's true. It's black. It's black. It's black. It's black. It's black. Runs all the way down. There'll be tons of Mogulus. Won't the snow have melted? Only further down, James pointed. I've been right down to the bottom, he said. I did it the first week I was here. All the slopes run into a single valley. It is called La Vallée des Fers. You can't actually make it as far as the town because there's a train track that cuts across. But if I can get to the track, I reckon I can walk the rest of the way. And then a train back to Dusseldorf. If my dad tries to send me back, I'll go to my mum in England. If she doesn't want me, I'll disappear. I've got friends in Paris and Berlin. I don't care. All I know is I've got to split. And you know what's good for you? You'll come too. I considered he was tempted to join the other boy, if only to help him on his way. But he had to do it. He had to. I don't have any skis, he said. Nor do I. James spat into the snow. Grief took all the skis when the season ended. He's locked them up somewhere. On the 3rd floor, maybe, but I'll find them, and then I'm out of here. He reached out to Alex with his ungloved hand. Come with me. Alex shook his head. I'm sorry, James. You go, and good luck too. But I'll stick it out a bit longer. I don't want to break my neck. Okay, that's your lookout. I'll send you a postcard. The two of them walked back towards the school. Alex gestured at the window where he had seen the masked face. Have you ever wondered what goes on up there? He asked. No, James shrugged. I suppose that's where the guards live. 2 whole floors. There's a basement as well, and Dr. Grief's room. Do you think he sleeps with Miss Stomach Bag? James made a face. That's a pretty gross thought. The two of them together? Darth Vader and King Kong? Well, I'm going to find my skis and get out of here, Alex. And if you've got any sense, you'll come too? Alex and James were skiing down the slope, the blades cutting deep through the surface snow. It was a perfect night. Everything frozen and still. They had left the academy behind them, but then I saw a figure ahead of them. Dr. Grief was there. He was standing motionless, wearing his dark suit, his eyes quite hidden by his red-lensed spectacles. Alex veered away from him. He lost control. He was moving faster and faster down the slope, his paws flailing at the air, his skis refusing to turn. You could see the ski jump ahead of him. Someone had removed barriers. He felt his skis leave the snow and shoot forward onto solid ice. And there was then it was a screaming drop down, tearing even further into the night, knowing there was no way back. Dr. Grief laughed, and at the same moment there was a click, and Alex shot into space, spinning a mile above the ground, and then falling. He woke up. He was lying in bed, the moonlight spilling over the corners onto the covers. He looked at his watch. 2:15. He played back the dream he had just had, trying to escape with James. Dr. Grief waiting for them. He had to admit the academy was beginning to get to him. He didn't usually have bad dreams of the school and the people in it were slipping under his skin, working their way into his mind. He thought about what he had heard. Dr. Reef laughing and someone else and something else. A clicking sound? That was strange. What had gone click? Had it actually been part of the dream? Suddenly Alex was completely awake. He got out of bed and went to the door and turned the handle. He was right. He hadn't imagined the sound while he was asleep. The door had been locked from outside. Something had to be happening. Alex was deep in the mind to see what it was. He got dressed as quickly as possible, then knelt down and examined the lock. He could make out two bolts, at least a centimeter in diameter, one at the top and one at the bottom. They must have been activated automatically. One thing was sure: he wasn't going to get out through the door that left the window. All the bedroom windows were fastened with a steel rod that allowed them to open 10 centimeters, but no more. Alex picked up one hand of the hand warmers and tore open the plastic cover. Inside there was a strip of what looked like grey putty. He remembered what Mrs. had told him. He had 30 seconds before it activated. Alex wrapped the putty around the steel rod. Then stood back. A wisp of smoke suddenly rose into the air. At the same time, he heard a fierce hissing sound as the chemical, whatever it was, burned through the metal. The rod fell apart. The rod fell apart. The rod fell apart, allowing the window to swing fully open. It was snowing. Alex put away the other hand warmers. He might need them later. Then he pulled on his coat and climbed out of the window. He was one floor up. Normally a fall from that height would have broken an ankle or a leg, but it had been snow for the best part of 10 hours, and a white bank had been built up against the wall right beneath him. Alex lowered himself as far as he could, then let go. He fell through the air and hit the snow, disappearing as far as his waist. He was freezing and damp before he had even started, but he was unhurt. He climbed out of the snow and began to move around the side of the building, making for the front. He would just have to hope that the main door entrance wasn't locked too, but sometime he was sure it wouldn't be. His door had been locked automatically. Presumably a switch had been thrown, and all the others would have been locked too. Most of the boys would be asleep. Even the ones who were awake wouldn't be going anywhere, leaving Dr. Grief free to do whatever he wanted, coming and going as he pleased. Alex had just made it to the side of the building when he heard the guards approaching, boots crunching. There was nowhere to hide, so he threw himself face down in the snow, hugging the shadows. There were two of them. He could hear them talking softly in German, but they didn't dare look up. If he made any movement, they would see him. If they came too close, they would probably see him anyway. He held his breath, his heart pounding. The guards walked past and round the corner. Their path would take them under his room. Would they see the open window? Alex had left the light off. Hopefully there would be no reason for them to look up, but he was still aware that he might not have much time. He had to move now. He lifted himself up and ran forward. His clothes were covered in snow and more flakes were falling, drifting into his eyes. It was the coldest part of the night, and Alex was shivering by the time he reached the main door. What would he do if it was not locked after all? He certainly wouldn't be able to. If it was locked after all, he certainly wouldn't be able to stay out in the open until morning. But the door was unlocked. Alex pushed it open and slipped into the warmth and darkness of the main hall. The dragon fireplace was in front of him. There had been a fire earlier in the evening, and the burnt-out logs were still smouldering in the hearth. Alex held his hands against the glow, trying to draw a little warmth into himself. Everything was silent. The empty corridor stretched into the distance, illuminated by a few by a few low-watt bulbs that had been left on at intervals. Only now did it occur to Alex that he could have been mistaken from the start. Perhaps the doors were locked every night as part of the security. Perhaps he had jumped too quickly to the wrong conclusion. There was nothing going on after all. No. It was a boy's voice, a long coughing shout that echoed through the school. A moment later, Alex heard feet stamping along a wooden corridor. Somewhere above. He looked for somewhere to hide and found it inside the fireplace right next to the logs. The actual fire was contained in a metal basket. There was a wide space on each side between the basket and the brick wood that swept up to become the chimney. Alex crouched low, feeling the heat on the side of his face and legs. He looked out past the two dragons, waiting to see what would happen. 3 people were coming down the stairs. Miss Stellenbosch was the first. She was followed by two of the guards, dragging something between them. It was a boy. He was face down, dressed only in his pyjamas, his bare feet sliding down the stone steps. Miss Stellenbosch opened the library door and went in. The 2 guards followed. The door crashed shut. The silence returned. It had all happened very quickly. Alex had been unable to see the boy's face, but he was sure he knew who it was. He had known from just the sound of his voice. James Prince. Alex eased himself out of the fireplace and crossed the hall, making for the library door. There was no sound coming from the other side. He knelt down and looked through the keyhole. No lights were on inside the room. He could see nothing. What should he do? If he went back upstairs, he would make it back to his room without being seen. He could wait until the doors were unlocked and then slip into bed. Nobody would have known he'd be out. The only person who had ever been in the school who had shown him any kindness was on the other side of the library door. He had been dragged down here. Perhaps he was being brainwashed, beaten, even. Alex couldn't just turn around and leave him. Alex had made his decision. He threw open the door and walked in. The library was empty. He stood in the doorway blinking. The library only had one door. All the windows were closed. There was no sign that anyone had been there. The Futurama stood in its alcove at the end, watching him as if he moved forward. Could he have been mistaken? Could Miss Stellenbosch and the guards have gone into a different room? Alex went over to the alcove and looked behind the armor, wondering if it might be concealed through a second exit. There was nothing. He tapped a knuckle against the wall. Curiously, it seemed to be made of metal. But unlike the wall across the stairs, there was no handle. Nothing to suggest a way through. There was nothing more he could do here, and he decided to go back to his room before he was discovered. But he had only just made it to the first floor when he heard voices again. More guards walking slowly down the corridor. Alex saw a door and slipped inside. Once again ducking out of sight, he was in the laundry room. There was a washing machine, a tumble dryer, and 2 ironing boards. At least it was warm in here. He found himself surrounded by soap fumes. The guards had gone. There was a metallic click that seemed to stretch to the length of the corridor. Alex realized that all the doors had been unlocked at the same time. He could go back to bed. He creeped and hurried forward. His footsteps took him past James's Prince's room next to his own. He noticed that James's door was open, and then a voice called out from inside. Alex? It was James. No, that wasn't possible. There was someone in his room. Alex looked inside, the light went on. It was James. He was sitting up in bed, bleary-eyed, and as if he'd just woken up. Alex stared at him. He was wearing the same pajamas as the boy he had just seen dragged into the library, but that couldn't have been him. There must have been someone else. What are you doing? James asked. I thought I heard something, I said. But you're dressed and you're soaking wet. James looked at his watch. It's almost 3. Alex was surprised that so much time had passed. It had only been 2:50 when he woken up. Are you all right? He asked. Yeah. What? Nothing. I'll see you later. And he crept back to his own room. He closed the door, then stripped off his wet clothes, dried himself in the tower, and got back into bed. If it wasn't James he had seen being taken into the library, who was it? And yet it had been James. He had heard the cry, seen the limit form on the stairs. So why was James lying down? Alex closed his eyes and tried to get back to sleep. The movements of the night had getting more puzzled and solved nothing, but at least he'd got something out of it all. He now knew how to get up to the second floor. Right, everyone, that'll be the end of me reading the Alex Rider book, Point Blanc, chapter 9 to 10. Right, everyone, so bye-bye, everyone, and thank you for listening to this book of me reading you.